An expert on all things Ukraine since the start of this war in February. General, always good to see you. Let's start there with the nuclear threat and some of the damage we're seeing to this plant. It's got to be a promising sign that this group, the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, is en route headed that way to address it.
Yes, they are, Marnie, and good evening. The Director General of the IAEA, as you mentioned, is sending a team. They haven't yet reached the nuclear plant yet, and the shelling is getting closer and closer, and so it is dangerously high in terms of the threat, in terms of what that could create as a nuclear event, as we say. I think in terms of Chernobyl, but in 1986, but Chernobyl and then some, or Chernobyl on steroids. So not only has Ukraine certainly in harm's way, but also parts of Western Europe as well. But the IAEA, if they put their team there, the first and foremost, what they need to look and review and inspect is the safety and security of that nuclear power plant. That would include not only the reactors and as well as equipment, but also to make sure that the staff and their staff's condition are in place to operate that nuclear plant, both again from a safety and a security standpoint as well.
Well, and to approach it diplomatically too, right? Because you've got the complicated layer that it's under Russian control right now, but it's being operated by Ukrainians.
That's correct. And in fact, when the attack occurred and the invasion occurred in February of this year, you and I were on air. The Russians, on one of the first areas they took, and one of the first things they took was this nuclear power plant. So it has been somewhat of a sanctuary for Russians in that area, but it's operated by the Ukrainians. So it's a hodgepodge, if you will, of both command and control, as well as who literally owns that piece of that territory. That's why it's so important that the IAEA get their eyes and ears on scene as soon as possible to make sure that the safety and security of that plant is secure, and the fact that there will not be, or the hope is that there will not be any type of nuclear catastrophe ensuing from either the shelling or the mishandling, frankly, of the equipment at that power plant.
And from what we're hearing, they may arrive as soon as Wednesday, so we'll continue to monitor that. General, I want to talk about what we're seeing from Ukrainian forces, certainly in the last 24 hours, this new offensive in the southern region. They're going back into where the Russians had captured and taken over some of these cities, and it's a new offensive. Talk a little bit about this status of the war.
Well, the status of the war right now, I believe, is tilting towards the favor of the Ukrainians at the moment. But specifically talking about what would be presumably offensive operations by the Ukrainians in the south. They've been shaping this battlefield for the last several weeks. And my sources, even in Washington, D.C., tell me that we're not quite yet ready to say that they've kicked off this offensive action. But in terms of shaping the battlefield, what I mean by that is they're going after Russian command and control centers. They're going after Russian troops in place. They're also going after Russian weapons depots and so forth. So that gives us indications that offensive action of some kind by the Ukrainian forces that they've been preparing since early August to take shape. We'll know more, not tomorrow, but perhaps in the next 2 or 3 days, whether or not this offensive action is actually taking shape.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the war in Ukraine is depleting American munition supplies. The U.S., as recently as last week, committed billions more in support for the Ukrainian army. Does this impact U.S. military readiness at all? Should folks here at home be concerned?
Yes, I think folks should be concerned, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a crisis at this moment. And again, we've provided up to $13.5 billion in terms of monies to go towards military capabilities for Ukraine.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.